Five-star quarterback Bryce Underwood, the number one overall prospect in the 2025 class, has just committed to LSU. And on today's edition of Locked On LSU, we'll break down why I think Bryce Underwood is the most impactful and the most important commit in the history of LSU football.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
It is such a good day to be an LSU Tiger. Welcome into the Locked On LSU podcast, your team every single day. Appreciate you for making us your first listen every single day. My name is Caroline Fenton, and I am your host, as I am every single day. And why is it such a good day to be an LSU Tiger? Well, now because LSU has the number one overall recruiting class in the 2025 class. And that was set over the edge because LSU has been putting in the work in the 2025 class, but that was set over the edge after the announcement from Bryce Underwood, the number one overall prospect in the 2025 class. And of course, the number one quarterback in that class as well, a five-star quarterback that has been pursued by every single program in the country on Saturday, pledged his commitment to play for LSU. Like I said, number one overall prospect in the 2025 class. What makes Bryce Underwood so special? We'll chat with Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider that has all of the ins and outs and full breakdowns of Bryce Underwood as he's been following his career for many years, that he's much more plugged in to what some high school coaches and even college coaches have been saying about Bryce Underwood. So we'll chat with Brian Smith later on this week. What makes Bryce Underwood so special? First and foremost, it's the size. He's going into his senior year of high school. Reminder, he's in the 2025 class, so we won't see Bryce Underwood until not this upcoming season, but the next season at LSU, of course, assuming that he decides not to reclassify, assuming that he does stick in the 2025 class. He's 6'3", 6'4", hovering right around there, 205. He's a big-bodied, incredibly tall guy. You saw pictures, and if you haven't seen them, look him up. You can just Google Bryce Underwood at LSU. When he took his official visit to LSU, he's on the sidelines taking pictures with Brian Kelly. I mean, he's towering over him. He's a massive kid. But it's not just the size that makes Bryce Underwood so special. It's the arm. And it's the escapability. Now, I'm not going to pretend like I'm a Bryce Underwood expert and that I've been following him for years. I've been watching his high school tape, but everything that I have heard from everyone that has been looking at the high school tape, that has been following Bryce Underwood for years, that would probably consider themselves to be Bryce Underwood experts, that is what I've been told makes him so special. First and foremost, it's the arm. It's the arm strength. It's the accuracy. It's the ability for him to move the ball downfield. It's the ball placement that he gives receivers the ability to win some of those 50-50 battles. That's one thing when I broke down Garrett Nussmeier, for example, in the bowl game, was he didn't give receivers the ability to make plays on balls maybe as much as I would have liked. Everything that I've heard from Bryce Underwood is that is something that makes him very special, that maybe differentiates him from other quarterbacks in this class or even other quarterbacks in all of college football, is his ability to place the ball in the perfect position. I would look at that maybe as a Michael Penix Jr. If you need a good example of what that looks like, Michael Penix Jr. in the Sugar Bowl against Texas, he placed balls in the most perfect windows in the most perfect positions. Now, one side of that is also having the receivers that can make plays on those balls, which of course Michael Penix Jr. had this past year, which of course Jaden Daniels had, and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas this past year. It's most likely what Bryce Underwood would have at LSU starting in 2025 and beyond. And speaking of receivers, we will get into that because this 2025 class isn't just heating up at the quarterback position, it's heating up across the offense as a whole. Of course, we'll get into that later on in today's podcast, but that's what makes Bryce Underwood so special. It's also his running ability. his escapability. This is written a breakdown by Alan True of 24/7 Sports, a national recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports. His full breakdown of Bryce Underwood is as follows: ahead of his years physically, and looks like he could be a senior or a college player already. Has a strong arm with the ability to make throws to any part of the field. Throws a good deep ball and can use touch to give his receivers a chance to go make plays on the ball, like I mentioned. Alan True continues and says, did an exceptional job of taking care of the ball as a freshman with 39 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. Got rid of the ball quickly and was decisive with the ball for the most part. Very good athlete who honestly could be a high level recruit on defense if he wasn't such a great quarterback. Uses those legs to escape the rush and extend plays. He looks to throw after escaping, but can also take off and be dangerous as a runner. That's one thing that you could maybe comp him to Jaden Daniels, was what made Jaden Daniels so good as a runner. It wasn't just the fact that he could drop back and then just jet off for a 30, 40-yard run. It was also Jaden Daniels could escape pressure, but continued to look downfield and said, look, if I need to use my legs, I'll use my legs. But if I need to use my legs initially to escape that pressure, then I can just roll out and try and find an open receiver. That's special, and that's not easy to do. You have to have hypervigilance of exactly what you're seeing on the field. You have to be able to think on the fly. It's not just a physical ability, it's also a mental ability as well. The ability to just stay calm even under pressure, and kind of just the ability to make those off-platform throws. So really impressive that you can see that ability from a guy that is so young, from a guy that still has an entire year of high school left. But I mentioned at the top of the show, this is what I believe. This is my opinion. The biggest and most impactful commitment in the history of LSU football. And this is why. First and foremost, Bryce Underwood is the highest rated player that LSU has ever landed in the history of LSU's program. Rated by 24/7 Sports, he's at 0.9999. So as close to a perfect prospect as you can get. For example, Arch Manning was a perfect, 1,000 rated quarterback. Bryce Underwood just a notch below Arch Manning. The second highest rated recruit in the history of LSU football is Leonard Fournette at a 0.9996. So, we're talking about splitting hairs here. We're talking about, margin of centimeters, not even inches. But Bryce Underwood is the highest rated recruit in the history of LSU football. Leonard Fournette was up there, as I mentioned. Russell Shepard in the early 2010s was a 0.9986, and then Derek Stingley Jr. 0.9980. So we know how impactful Leonard Fournette and Derek Stingley Jr. was for this team, for their LSU respective teams. Bryce Underwood, at least from the recruiting aspect, is rated higher than both of those players. Now, look, we know what Leonard Fournette's career at LSU looked like. We know how impactful Derek Stingley Jr. was for that 2019 national championship team, and then ultimately became a top 5 pick in the NFL draft. So we know what those careers, how they came to fruition, at least in an LSU uniform. So it's difficult to compare, and I'm not saying that Bryce Underwood is going to be more to LSU football than Leonard Fournette or Derek Stingley Jr. was. I'm just looking at it from a recruiting perspective, but I think that should give you perspective enough of how massive the commitments of Derek Stingley Jr. and Leonard Fournette were. I mean, it sent shockwaves across not just the state of Louisiana, but college football as a whole. Those were two foundational and pivotal pieces on their respective LSU teams. So if Bryce Underwood is very fairly compared to those two, that just kind of puts into perspective how massive of a commitment that is. And I think also, too, what makes him even more valuable than those two players that I just mentioned were, he plays the most important position in all of sports. He's a quarterback. And being as highly rated as he is, and also being a quarterback, I think adds another layer to it. And that's no disrespect to the cornerback position. That's no disrespect to the running back position, because in so many games, Leonard Fournette just put the team on his shoulders. He carried that LSU team in the mid 2010s, 2014, 2015 years in several different games. But when you're talking about a quarterback and you're talking about this era of college football, when it is aired out, when it is incredibly pass heavy, the quarterback has always been the most important position, but it has never been more important than it is now. So LSU, that's a massive commitment. That is a massive commitment, what I believe to be the biggest of all time. But coming up next, I want to take a look back and take a look forward at just how important Bryce Underwood is to this LSU team. Maybe more of an indicator of where LSU is at as a program. And we will get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel because the NFL season is coming to a close, but there is still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose, and the app is so easy to use. There are so many different ways to bet. You can have live same game parlays. If you can find bets in the new Explore tab, that's what I love to do to kind of see what other experts might be saying, bets that they might choose. That makes it super easy to look at all of that on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. You can also make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, which is the best way to find popular parlays. And there's so much more. So visit fanduel.com/locked on and make your first bet a layup. Again, that's fanduel.com/locked on. And new customers get $150 back in bonus bets guaranteed when all you have to do is just place a $5 bet. I love FanDuel. I think you will too. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LS. You are part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. And speaking of Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Bryce Underwood, the #1 quarterback in the 2025 class. Bryce Underwood, the #1 overall prospect in the 2025 class. A 5-star has just committed to LSU. As I mentioned in the last segment, I think that this is the most impactful, the most important, and the biggest commitment in the history of LSU football. But I also think it's the perfect indicator for where LSU is as a program. That's how big this commitment is. Now, I also would be remiss if I didn't mention that a lot of things change. That from now until National Signing Day, maybe early signing day later this year in December, or National Signing Day in February in 2025, a lot of things can change. Recruits can be fickle. Recruits change their mind at the drop of a hat. And if you think that there's not every single program across the country that's not going to continue to recruit Bryce Underwood very heavily, that's not going to continue to put the full court press on him just because he's committed to LSU, you would be wrong. So just keep in mind, a commitment is massive and it's huge, but it is not a binding agreement, nor does it guarantee that Bryce Underwood will play the entirety of his college career at LSU if he plays his college career at LSU at all. So let's just go ahead and put that out there and understand that things change in recruiting. But for right now, it's a massive commitment. And I think it's a massive indicator for where LSU is as a program. What I mean by that is, I want to look back and I want to look forward. And what Bryce Underwood coming to LSU, or at least committing to LSU, would mean. First of all, looking back, think about how many years we as LSU fans have endured of just brutal quarterback play, of average at best quarterback play. Talk about how frustrated we were this past season that you had a championship offense and a horrendous defense, and how that defense cost this LSU offense an opportunity at competing at the highest level. Well, I mean, that's a massive switch up from where we were maybe in the Les Miles eras, where you had championship defenses, top 20, top 15, top 5 defenses across college football, yet you had offenses that could barely even complete a forward pass. I mean, you look at the years of Brandon Harris and Anthony Jennings and Jarrett Lee, where it was turnover city, where all you could do was run the football and rely on those running backs. So many years of bad quarterback play, so many years of abysmal offenses, of just frustrating offenses under Les Miles, where it felt like the only way that those teams could move the ball down the field was with trick plays. So frustrating. Fast forward to now, and that was not that long ago. We're talking about a 10 to 15 year span here. Now, fast forward. LSU has two Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks in 5 years. LSU has had the number one offense in America twice in the last 5 years, of course, 2019 and then 2023. And now you have the number one overall prospect and the number one quarterback in America coming to LSU in 2025. That's all in a 10 to 15 year span. That to me is the biggest indicator of the evolution of this program, where it felt like this program was just stuck in the era of like 1980s 1990s football, of playing a hard-nosed defense and running the football, where it felt like, man, like looking at all of excuse me, all of the offenses across the country that move the ball downfield, that could air it out, that had quarterbacks that could throw for 350 plus yards a game. I had such quarterback jealousy, offense jealousy for so many years. And now you're looking at every other program across America saying, man, look at that LSU offense. Look how fun that offense is to watch. Look at those receivers. Look at those quarterbacks. Look at the numbers that this LSU offenses are putting up. That is a complete 180, and it's an evolution of the program that's coming into the 21st century, that's now adapting to the style of offense that you need to play in order to compete for national championships. Look at Washington. They have an elite offense and an okay defense. Look at really the LSU team that won the 2019 national championship game. Elite offense, average defense. You need an elite offense these days in this era of college football to win national championships. Now, Michigan might be the exception. It is not lost on me. So that's kind of looking back. The last 10 to 15 years that these LSU offenses have evolved rapidly, and necessarily so. But also kind of looking ahead at projecting the power rankings in the SEC, kind of looking ahead, now that the college football playoff is expanding, but also now that the SEC is inherently more difficult, now that you eliminate divisions and you add Texas and Oklahoma into the mix, just kind of projecting where LSU is going to fall in the next 5 to 10 years. I think this Bryce Underwood commitment is an indication that LSU has such a bright future ahead of itself, because Bryce Underwood could have gone literally wherever he wanted. Georgia could have gone there. Alabama could have gone there. Ohio State could have gone there. Michigan could have gone there. He chose LSU over Alabama and Texas A&M and Ole Miss and Ohio State and Michigan, you name it. Any program in the country was salivating at the thought of landing a quarterback like Bryce Underwood. Could have gone wherever he wanted. NIL or not. I mean, I'm sure there were several programs, LSU included, that was willing to throw a decent bit of NIL money his way. He could have gone somewhere that maybe looks more poised to win national championships in 2025, but he didn't. He chose LSU. I think that shows you how he views, at least Bryce Underwood, the top player in that class, views LSU, and it's how it's set up for success in the future. I think that looking at this Bryce Underwood commitment and other commitments in the 2025 class, which we'll get into coming up next, shows that LSU is recruiting at a national championship level. That LSU in the 2025 class, it's building the foundation. You built the foundation under Brian Kelly in the first 2 years, but now looking at the players that want to come to LSU in 2025 and beyond, that's a foundation for a national championship. Brian Kelly talked about how they're ready to ascend. Landing a talent like Bryce Underwood accelerates that ascension to becoming a championship program. And that players around the country are taking notice as to what LSU is doing at the recruiting level and what LSU is poised to do in 2025 and beyond. All credit in the world to this coaching staff, because landing a player like Bryce Underwood's not easy. It takes a lot of commitment. It takes a lot of, persistence, constant communication. And that's what they were able to do. Build that relationship with the player and have the conversations that need to be had. Open and honest conversations that can assure not just Bryce Underwood, but also his family that this is the right place to be, that this is where you're going to find success. You're not just going to win championships at LSU. We're going to set you up to win championships at the highest level. So I think that this shows where LSU has come in the last 10 to 15 years, and it also shows what LSU could be set up to be, especially compared to the Georgias and the Alabamas and the Texases of the SEC and the biggest programs across college football, where you kind of compare and where the rest of the country can see LSU moving forward. But it's not just Bryce Underwood. LSU has the number one class in 2025, not just because of Bryce Underwood, but also because you have two of the top skill position players in the 2025 class, and that Bryce Underwood's going to have a lot of weapons to work with in 2025 and beyond. We'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. I know that we come to sports, and you probably come to this podcast to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life. But can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? Let's talk for a minute about real life. According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. I mean, that is scary. I'm still recovering from the flu 2 weeks later. And I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if, one of my family members, or maybe if one of your kids, I don't have children, but I can only imagine how scary that is if your kids get sick while a supply chain issue keeps you from life-saving medication that they might need. So thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. So the Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinusitis, skin infections, among so many others. I mean, this stuff could happen to any of us. We've all been there. So visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It has never been more important to be prepared than today. So go to jacemedical.com and use offer code locked on to get $20 off of your order. Again, that's jacemedical.com. Use offer code locked on, LOCKEDON, to get $20 off of your order. All right, rolling along here on Locked on LSU. LSU lands the number one overall prospect in the 2025 class, Bryce Underwood, but it does not stop there because LSU now has, in the 2025 class, the number one quarterback recruit, Bryce Underwood, the number one wide receiver in the country, and the number one running back in the country. Let's talk about wide receiver. DeCorian Moore, the number one receiver in the 2025 class, a 5-star receiver, number one overall receiver, the number 2 or number 1, depending on which rankings you look at, number 1 or number 2 player out of the state of Texas. And when we talk about states like Texas or Florida or California, if you are even in the top 50 players in that state, that's impressive, much less the top 2 in that state. I think that's an indication of just how good DeCorian Moore really is. He committed to LSU, of course, in the 2025 class. Again, over any program in America, but also look at Alabama, who was pushing hard for DeCorian Moore. Texas A&M pushing hard for DeCorian Moore. Chose LSU over those teams. And so not only do you get the privilege of having DeCorian Moore on your team, you also get the privilege of not having to play a DeCorian Moore in 2025 and beyond. Gabe Brooks, a national scouting analyst, breaks down DeCorian Moore as a big play receiver who provides return game weapon for a perennial Texas 6A powerhouse. Pedestrian height, but good length with some frame space. So he's incredibly quick. 100 and 200 meter reps is what Gabe Brooks breaks down. Quick, big playability. He can be your deep you can be your deep ball guy, but he can also be, a short game go-to guy, kind of check down guy, maybe 10, 15 yards downfield. So massive commitment for LSU, getting to Corian Moore and also continuing to replenish that assembly line of receivers that you've kind of established, because it started with Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase. You saw it this past year with Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. Could Kyron Lacey and Chris Hilton be that next duo of receivers in 2024? We'll see. Shelton Sampson, how does he fit into that equation? So you were just stockpiling some of the most elite receiver talent in the country, and DeCorian Moore is that next receiver. Another one, an in-state guy that you needed to land. This was a non-negotiable, not just because he's one of the best players in the country, but because he's one of the best players in the country, and he is in your backyard, New Orleans, and that's five-star running back Harlem Berry. Played high school ball at St. Martin's Episcopal in New Orleans. Number one recruit number one recruit in the state of Louisiana in 2025, number one running back in the 2025 class. And it never really seemed like a question about where Harlem Berry would go. That's one thing that Brian Smith, Locked On's official recruiting insider, broke down with me. Yeah, he was being recruited by all of the other big programs in the country. But as a Louisiana kid, he's always wanted to go to LSU. The early prediction was LSU, and it was really no surprise that he was going to come to LSU. But this is what I think is so important about landing Harlem Berry. Great player. He's a player in your backyard, but also looking at the future of the running back position at LSU. Logan Diggs has announced that he will enter the transfer portal. He was your leading rusher this past year. He was a big part of getting those, what I like to call like the nitty gritty yards. Like, it's 3rd and 3. Logan Diggs could get you those nitty gritty, gross, important 3 yards. 3rd and goal. Logan Diggs can be that big, bruising, bowling ball kind of a running back to push you through into the end zone. You're not going to have that this upcoming year. But what you do have is a Caleb Jackson or a Trey Hawley, those true freshmen this past year that can kind of ascend and take on a larger role in 2024. But you need also, similar to the wide receiver position, constant replenishing of that running back room, because this LSU offense works at its best when you have a threat, not just in the air, but also on the ground. I talk about how this LSU offense has come into the 21st century. What I think a lot of football fans in general mistake that as is throwing the ball in every single down. But no, look at the most successful offenses at the college level, at the NFL level. The most successful offenses do have that big play passing ability where you can air it out. But that's not effective without the threat of running the football. Look at the Buffalo Bills, for example. What has been the difference, I believe, between the Bills getting to the Super Bowl versus kind of their ceiling of what we've seen of AFC Championship game or divisional round games is the Bills don't have a run threat. Josh Allen doesn't have the security of being able to fall back on the run game if need be. That is what LSU needs. You need that dual aspect of, yeah, we can throw the football, but we can also run it down your throats too. Jaden Daniels was that for LSU this past year. You're not going to get that with every quarterback, where your quarterback can be your run game if need be. So bringing in talented running backs, and also bringing in talented running backs that are the modern running back that can get you those nitty gritty yards if need be, but also catch passes out of the backfield. That's something Harlem Berry can do very well. He can run the football, he can catch passes, he can be your kind of dual threat Alvin Kamara style of running back. So it's huge. It's huge. And he's from Louisiana. It's huge that you are getting the top players at 3 of the most important positions in football. And it's huge to see what LSU can build upon from there. This might be the most important the most important class in the history of LSU football, that you are now establishing a foundation for a national championship because you are recruiting at a national championship level. Huge, huge for Brian Kelly and for this LSU program. Now, reminder, that's in 2025. We are a full season removed from seeing maybe the fruits of that recruiting work, maybe even 2, assuming that Bryce Underwood won't start his true freshman season. So coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, let's bring it back to 2024. Let's reset of where we are with this roster, players that have entered the transfer portal, players that have committed to the NFL draft, players that are coming back to LSU, plus LSU has hired its next defensive coordinator, Blake Baker from Missouri. What is LSU getting in its next DC? Can Blake Baker bring this defense out of the depths and the drudges of college football and bring it back to the expectation at LSU? We'll get into all of that on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.